I'm Alan Matiso, the Associate Director of the Baker Institute, and I want to welcome everybody here tonight to the second in our series of lectures which we're calling Mexicans Look at Mexico. This is a project that the Baker Institute is jointly sponsoring with the Humanities Research Center. We have, I think, important topics and very important speakers. And no topic at the moment is more important than immigration, and we are fortunate to have an internationally renowned scholar here to talk on that subject. And Carolyn Levander, who is a professor of history and the director of the Humanities Research Center, has the honor of introducing Professor Bustamante.
Thank you and welcome. I am very honored as well as very gratified to be able to introduce Professor Jorge Bustamante, who will be speaking on immigration, security, and human rights. Dr. Bustamante has been hailed as a leading expert in the field of international migration. He has authored over 200 international publications dealing with Mexican immigration to the U.S. and the U.S.-Mexican border. He is presently the Eugene Conley Professor of Sociology at the University of Notre Dame. In 1994, Bustamante accepted appointments to the Joint Public Advisory Committee as well as the Border Environmental Cooperation Commission, which were created by the governments of Mexico, the United States, and Canada as a result of the parallel agreements of NAFTA. He continues to serve as coordinator of the Social Science Committee of the Council of Advisors on Science and Technology for the President of Mexico. His awards, achievements, and publications are more vast and extensive than I can hope to capture tonight if we actually want to hear him speak, but I would like to mention that in '95, the government of Japan appointed him honorary consul in Baja California, Mexico. He has also served as a member of a binational group of researchers appointed by the Mexican and U.S. governments to conduct research on Mexican migration to the U.S. He has been elected member and then president of a 5-member committee to study the worldwide relationship between international migration and human rights. His most recent appointment was to an advisory group on immigration and population policies by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. He is therefore uniquely credentialed to speak this evening on trafficking and vulnerability of migrants, a conceptual form. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bustamante.
Thank you very much. I certainly want to extend my appreciations to the organizers of this event, and I'm very happy to be in Rice again. I have been here for many years, actually more than 20, ever since I was a faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin. And now I'm particularly glad to be here on such a gorgeous day as it is in Houston, as opposed to South Bend, Indiana, where I have to return, unfortunately, tomorrow. I would like to start my presentation in making reference to two features of this map. One, that points to the heterogeneity of the border region where Mexico borders with different United States. On the West Coast, Mexico borders with the affluent United States, the counties of Southern California, and at the end of the line, in touching the Gulf of Mexico, we are bordering with a very different United States, as you know, with counties that have the lowest income per capita in the United States, in quite a contrast with the other end in California, where Tijuana borders with San Diego in a kind of relationship that is more similar to the macro-dimensional level of the bilateral relations between Mexico and the United States. The contrast between Tijuana and San Diego resemble the contrast between the two countries. And that is something that has to do with different stories. When we focus on the case of Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, at the middle of the line, of the borderline, we see a lot of things that are kind of in the middle of the road in terms of not only economic development, but in terms of the community history of the border on the two sides, that for a long time they formed a very special kind of relations that you don't see typical of the rest of the border. Obviously, as you go toward the east following the line, you find, as the map that is on top to the right shows, and I think that I have one that shows the concentration of the population of Mexican origin, and as you see, the darkest part is in southeast Texas, and where we have heard some manifestations of the bilateral relations in regard to cultural aspects and the use of on the predominance of the use of one language and the other that varies depending on the part of the border you want to see. This is a paragraph that I don't know if you in the back can read. Can you? No, okay, because then I'll read it to you. This is a summary of a study that was sponsored by the U.S. Department of Labor, and that was conducted on California to try to analyze particularly the agricultural industry, and that this is the conclusion of the study. It says the reliance on short-term job assignments, paid intermediaries, and recruitment practices that produce labor surpluses transfer many U.S. agricultural production costs to the migrant workers and the local communities that sustain them. In effect, migrant workers, so necessary for the success of the labor-intensive U.S. agricultural system, subsidize, and I would like to emphasize this word that is quite heavy, subsidize that very system with their own and their families' indigence. The system functions to transfer costs to workers who are left with income so marginal that for the most part only newcomers and those with no other options are willing to work on our nation's farms. This is particularly pertinent in these days where this doesn't have anything to do with the predominant notion of the impact of immigration from Mexico, and actually is in total contrast with the predominant view of the effects of the presence of migrants, including undocumented immigrants, which in this study points out that in the state of California, that produces 1/3 of the total production, agricultural production of the United States, the labor force that produces it is close to 90% Mexican in origin. And that degree of dependency is something that it is not in the mind, certainly was not last night in the debate of the candidates of the Republican Party, but very much the opposite. And that is something that is related to the fact that the United States government defines the problems associated to immigration from Mexico as a domestic problem. This definition of a phenomenon of immigration that is bilateral by definition, because you have nationals of one country entering another country that is not theirs. So that's the bilateral nature of the phenomenon of immigration to the United States. Nevertheless, it is defined by the United States government as a domestic problem. So that is something that determines a view of the solutions that, according to the United States government, can only come from unilateral decisions from the United States government. So that view that omits the international nature of the phenomenon is something that it is behind the basic assumptions of the options or the proposals for solutions that to the definitions of problems associated with the presence of immigrants from Mexico. And these unilateral decisions have not solved any of these problems, and it's difficult to think that we'll ever solve any problem because it departs from the notion that is a domestic phenomenon. So a domestic phenomenon, the definition of a domestic phenomenon applied to a phenomenon that is not domestic, that by definition is bilateral, it's difficult to think that could ever be solved, that kind of a phenomenon. This is something that it is common to labor immigration all over the world. Labor immigration or labor migration, depending on the perspective you use, is a phenomenon that is usually the result of a process of interaction of factors located at least in the two countries involved, and it's a labor migration between two countries, such as the case of Mexico to the United States. And that is something that it is very important, because when you see the facts scientifically obtained that shows that the factors that shapes the phenomenon of immigration are located on the two sides of the border, when you realize that the demand of the labor force of the immigrants is an endogenous phenomenon, is a phenomenon that is produced by factors internal to the United States that interact with the supply of this labor force to shape this de facto labor market that is conformed by the interaction of the factors deriving from the demand of the labor force of immigrants that is endogenous to the country of destination, and in interaction with the factors that produces the supply of this labor force. So in that context, that bilateral notion that is part of the basic story of the question of immigration is something that is reaching a situation that was not being totally absent in the history of immigration from Mexico, but is in the present time has been part of the preoccupation of the United Nations for the rise of xenophobia all over the world. And this xenophobia, which is based on ideologies that are not based on empirical, scientifically found data, but on ideologies, are difficult to be removed, are difficult to be erased or not taken into account. And this is something that involves a great variety of countries, certainly involves Mexico. Immigration from Central America that come to Mexico with the objective of reaching the United States is an immigration that is victimized with abuses of their human rights, sometimes in equal or even worse basis in comparison to the way Mexicans are victimized in the United States. And that is something that has particularities that are not easy to compare with other international migration phenomena. In the case of Mexico, this is a transmigration, and a transmigration that it doesn't deal with a labor magnet in Mexico, but the magnet is in the United States. So these are people that enter Mexico with the idea of reaching the United States. And in that context, then, we have a lot to learn from the experiences of international migration from other countries, some of them in Central America itself. It is not very well known the fact of the way Costa Rica deals with immigration from Nicaragua in a way that is an example to other countries in terms of how they have a system of social services, particularly health services, to Nicaraguans on an equal basis to Costa Ricans. And this is not a unique example. There are other examples, such as immigration to Canada. Canada and Mexico signed an agreement for labor migration something more than 25 years ago that has been another example of rationality applied to the needs of the two countries in regard to labor migration. This is light years distant from the realities of some of the better known international migrations in the rest of the continent. As I said, xenophobia is something that is a very basic preoccupation of the United Nations. It's not a new preoccupation. It's something that led the General Assembly to try to have a diagnosis on the question of the relationship between international migration and human rights that I was appointed to direct. And this is something that happened very shortly after the General Assembly of the United Nations had defined international migrants as a vulnerable group. This is not just a footnote. This is the definition of a group to be vulnerable group for the definitions of the United Nations means that resources and important resources and monies are allocated to do the kind of actions that vulnerable groups such as women, children, handicapped, indigenous populations, national minorities, where the United Nations considers that the governments where these populations live are not doing enough to protect the human rights of these people. And in this context, the job that I have, the mandate that I accepted as a Special Rapporteur for the Human Rights of Migrants, it's something that is based first on a demonstrated independence of whoever is appointed as a Special Rapporteur, because I don't work for the Mexican government. I don't work for any other government. I don't even work for the United Nations. I'm not in the payroll of the United Nations. And that independence I have used to criticize some aspects of the policies derived from the General Assembly of the United Nations. When I have had the facts of my own research or the research by others. And what I do as a special rapporteur is to visit countries that have issued invitations to me or to any other special rapporteur. I cannot go to country just because I like to travel. I have to wait till I receive an official invitation for the country that I have shown some interest in visiting. So far I have visited 12 countries, and in the last 2 years, and I have 4 more years. And of course I will not visit the whole world. I'm going to visit the countries that are salient in the United Nations population data about the volume of international flows. And so following this data, I show interest to visit certain countries. And there are countries that I have shown interest that have not responded positively, and I have not received any invitation. And obviously that's the privilege of a sovereign countries, and that is part of the rules of the game. And that means sometimes a kind of a peculiar predicament, because I'm already in my list of the beginning of next year includes Mexico, and I know, and I already have mentioned that I'm going to stick to the facts that I find, and that I can anticipate that it's not going to be positive. And that is something that I just mentioned that for nobody to be surprised, because part of my research as a scholar has to do with doing research, obviously, and that's what I do for a living for the University of Notre Dame, that didn't have absolutely nothing to do in my appointment to the United Nations. And that is something that it is not pleasant to criticize your own country, because this is not only the responsibilities of the government of Mexico, but is the responsibility of the whole civil society of Mexico, that have such a low level of consciousness about the responsibilities that derive from being part of the international community, and having accepted responsibilities to have human rights at the top of the legal hierarchy next to the Constitution, when we have accepted to be parties to a number of conventions that speak about the obligations of countries in regard to human rights, but to the most important set of standards in regard to the question of human rights of migrants, that is the International Convention for the Protection of all migrant workers and their families, that was approved by the General Assembly in 1990, and that has been ratified only by countries of origin, and has not been ratified by a single country of destination. This has created a new division of the world between not only the rich and the poor, but something very close to that, which is countries of origin and countries of destination of international migrations. And that is something that is very unfortunate, because that distinction, it's not part of it's not part of nature. It's not produced by Mother Nature. Is produced by power differentials. And that is something that it is an element of the current situation of the world, where we have such ominous news about the contrast and contradictions that produces these inequalities. Focusing on the United States, which I have officially visited a few months ago, invited by the United States government, I had organized a tour that actually began in California and then went toward the east, following the border in the United States side, and then I went up north on the East Coast. And the most striking thing that I found was the horror stories of families of migrants in regard to the raids, in regard to these practices by the authorities of immigration of the United States, where you see right now images that we once saw in the Hollywood production of the Gestapo activities doing raids against the Jewish people in Germany of the Second World War. And what I've heard, it's equal to what I have seen in those images. What I have been told by people that have suffered the forceful entrance of the police that arrest all the adults of the house and that take them away with the scenario of the children crying, demanding explanations for seeing their parents being taken away of them, particularly when you find that many of the children that are left abandoned are U.S. citizens, are children that were born in the United States of undocumented immigrant parents. And that sometimes this produce a phenomenon of children that had to follow the parents that were arrested and then expelled from the United States, and that these children are all of a sudden found in Mexico, a country that didn't have anything to do with their process of formation and socialization, that in many occasions they don't even speak Spanish, and that are victims of a new phenomenon in Mexico of a total disrupted psychology of these children, that where everything that surrounds them all of a sudden is alien to them in the country of their parents. And that is something that in Mexico there is not enough consciousness of this kind of new phenomenon, and therefore very little is being done about it. And this is just to mention one phenomenon where you find in Mexico a very strange condition of the civil society of Mexico that behaves in a very indifferent way from what is happening to these migrants that are residing with an intention of a permanent basis in the United States, and that were the origin of last year of $23 billion as a result of remittances that originated in the work of these people that are of the same background, of the same blood of the Mexicans in Mexico. And in spite of that element of proximity, the element of belonging, the civil society of Mexico has not been able to produce a political cost to a government that does very little for the protection of the human rights of their citizens in the United States. So it is a complex phenomenon. one in which this paragraph that I just read to you is like it belongs to another country or another planet. There is very little consciousness, particularly of the word that a research based on scientific methodology was produced under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Labor, as you see up there, and that speaks about the degree of dependence that the economy of the United States has about the migrants, to the extent, to use this term right here, that I said that is so heavy, subsidized. That subsidy is to the richest country in the world. But you don't see or hear anything related to that reality discovered by the only rational method we have to define reality, which is the scientific method. You don't find anything of that in the debate of last night, not even remotely. What you found is exactly the opposite of the meaning of this paragraph. And that is part of the problem we have, and which is different than the one that I mentioned in Mexico, but is share the complexities of a society that has produced not only a very confusing picture of the realities of immigration, but a picture that portrays the vicinity of the two countries as if one would be an enemy country. That is the meaning of the wall that now it's under construction between Mexico and the United States. And that is something that, of course, poses a question of what we as members of this society, or as in my case, of the other society, the Mexican society, could do to change this something that is not only very distant from the reality, but is something basically unfair, as it is the fact that a society such as the United States produces a demand of labor force out of which don't recognize any responsibility, any moral responsibility, in spite of being a product of the very own society. So what I do basically as a member of the social science is that includes my responsibilities of education as professor of a university, is to try to produce something in that absent consciousness of the realities that surrounded us and that become sometimes an obstacle for our sincere intentions of being good citizens of our country. And that it is not only, as I said, for the United States, but for Mexico and many other countries in the world, but not the whole world. There are societies where the realities of international migration and human rights are very contrasting. And I mentioned just two examples in this continent. The case of Costa Rica vis-a-vis the Nicaraguan immigration, and the case of Canada in regard to Mexican immigration. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions.
Okay.
People have questions for Dr. Bustamante.
Do you have any thoughts about what we might be able to do to turn around those very false attitudes and to restore the welcoming spirit that this country once had toward immigrants?
what are the facts that are based on our own beliefs about what we believe, whatever that is, immigration is all about. And then I think that it would be easy to proceed after that for obvious mechanisms that we that are persuaded that we cannot live with injustices or unfair scenarios around us.
It seems like it should be an easier issue to deal with the question of these citizen children. I'm curious what legal arguments could even be used to produce the deportation of minors who are citizens.
But I have made that question to very high-level authorities in the United States, and the answer that I received from one of the people at the top was that that's the responsibility of the parents, that the parents are to blame for taking their children to another country, and where the children have no responsibility for being there. But that is the responsibility of the parents. This is what I had as an answer.
It's not even a legal answer.
No, not even remotely. But that's the real answer that I received.
Let's say between the United States and Mexico, in the U.S. citizens, the rise of xenophobia. Have you looked at the issue of the immigrant and the rise of irredentism?
And the rise
of irredentism, like when Irredeemed population, when the Austrians, German speakers were put in Italy after World War I.
No, I have not. That is a very intriguing proposition that you make, and I must confess my ignorance on that. So I don't have any idea how to answer. Yes.
I'm interested in Canada, and could you elaborate a little bit more about how they are handling Mexican immigrants, what they do that is different?
Canada signed an agreement with Mexico for the acceptance of Mexican workers that wanted to work in the agriculture, basically in agriculture in Canada. And this happened, I think, that 35 years ago. And that has been an example of rationality in dealing with international migration between two countries. And lately I have heard of complaints of Mexican immigrants in Canada because they don't have the freedom they want to work in all kinds of industries as they wish, and because Canada has accepted them to work in agriculture 35 years ago, and that's still the provision.
They go as guest workers? Are they on a track to citizenship?
No, not in Canada. It's interesting because Canada has very open legal system for acquiring citizenship, but those that are particularly in this program have no access to that. If you go as a Mexican citizen and get to Canada, as I have a sister of mine doing, she's already Canadian citizen because she has used the open legal system for that, which was, in her case, very open, and she's already Canadian citizen and Mexican citizen.
Yes? Could you explain the attitude of the Mexicans relative to the Central Americans? I know in Costa Rica there's a Mexican hospital. There have been times when Mexico has sort of taken a paternal approach to the Central Americans. Is there some historic elements, or why are they so mean to the ones who are trying to get the United States coming through Mexico? I know their policies are much more draconian than ours. I
think that they compete very closely. They compete very closely for that, with that term you use of draconian measures. But two wrongs don't make one right. I learned that saying here in the United States. To answer your question, I've done research because I was trying to find the answer to the indifference of the Mexican society at large about the plight of the Mexican citizens residing on a permanent basis in the United States. Those that organized the marches that took place last year in the spring months of last year, that resulted in a phenomenon that was the first time in the history of the United States, a country of immigrants. Never before had the United States seen demonstrations of protesting for the mistreatment of migrants, as it was seen last year, with more than 2 million marchers in more than 100 cities in the United States. Well, this is something that I wrote to Professor Huntington in Harvard, disagreeing with his notion that Mexicans are unassimilable to the United States culture, saying, don't you see that these marches are a demonstration of assimilation? They don't do that in Mexico. They learn how to do that in the United States. But he disagreed with me. Well, I'm very proud that we have such a disagreement. And because his contention that the Mexicans are inassimilable to the American culture is racist. And but the question of Mexico is one that was very controversial the first time that I produced a publication saying that that indifference of the Mexican civil society toward the migrants is the response of a Mexican case of racism. The Mexicans look at the migrants as if they were second-class Mexican citizens. The Mexicans, particularly of the middle and upper classes, don't want to have any association with the migrants in the United States. They feel ashamed of them, that exist, and they think of them as if they were members of a different planet, and with no desire of being associated with what they do in the United States, which is to me something that it is a delicate question, because that's part of the essence of consciousness of what the immigration to the United States means for we old Mexicans. And it means a lot, not because of the $23 billion that they sent to Mexico, to the Mexican economy last year alone, because it's a yearly figure, but because we are the same. We are the same at the two sides of the border. We belong to the same roots, not only have the same background, but we have the same blood. And we have invented this kind of definition of the migrants as descendants from the Mexican Indians, and that explains their darker skin color, and that explains part of the discriminations that the people that live in the United States, when they go back to Mexico, are victimized. Yes?
There was a little bit of press a week or two ago about a case with a nursing baby that the mother was imprisoned. I don't know if you saw that, or some of the rest of you, where the baby basically was then just taken by Child Protective Services and wouldn't eat or drink for 3 days, the mother's breast got horribly engorged, and finally, after 3 days, they brought her a pump. And according to the article, there were enough protests by this that the U.S. Immigration Service was beginning to rethink its policy towards at least separating nursing babies from their mothers. But it kind of made me think, well, like, how did these protests happen? And if it was actually effective enough to, have there being some reconsideration of the policy, maybe this could provide a route for other types of protests, perhaps in counterpoint to the, Blue Dog Show or whatever. I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to carry out, more kind of effective objections.
Well, that has to do with the absence of this kind of what a sociologist, a French sociologist said, invented the concept of collective consciousness, conscience collective. That's what is missing. The conscience collective that comes before the action, and that are dependent on the conscience collective that we don't have. We don't have in the United States. What we have is the ideas that are precisely supporting that kind of practice. The one member of the South Bend community where this was discussed was saying that again, that it was the responsibility of the mother, that probably was an indecent person showing that he was nursing the baby. And when you have these kinds of explanations about what seems to be an indecent action to separate a baby from his mother while he had been nursed, it's a kind of aberration that derives from irrational elements of an ideology that is anti-immigrant, that is predominant in the United States society today.
I believe that's evil. It's more evil to separate a child from the mother.
I agree with you.
There's not another word to explain that.
Yes.
Do you see any evidence for a rise in more autonomous Mexican economic development that might mitigate the need for migration to the United States?
Well, that's kind of a different presentation than that I was assigned today. But let me respond seriously to you. That is a very complex situation in Mexico. We had a president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, that was used to intervene into the question with lies and false promises, and that after being a governor of Guanajuato, where he had the advantage of the remittances of many Mexican migrants coming from the state where actually the phenomenon of migration began more than 100 years ago, he didn't do absolutely nothing concrete for these immigrants that he called heroes. And so it was a situation that I am, as a Mexican, I'm ashamed. And because he was very ignorant of the United States political culture, as to put, as we say, all the eggs in one basket of the bilateral relations in his personal friendship. He thought that it was a friendship with President Bush, and with a total disregard of the United States Congress, which is the place that has the last word on immigration policies. And that is something that Unfortunately, we don't see an improvement in President Calderon right now. President Calderon has shown a good deal of ignorance himself when he decided to preach a recommendation to the candidates of the Republican Party, asking them not to use immigration for their political agendas. And of course, who could find any background of that, any experience where that could make sense, any legal basis to do that? President Calderon has shown with that kind of an action, which he meant to be politically effective, of the same kind of ignorance of the political system that President Fox shown in the previous sexennium. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.